Good evening, everyone. Tonight we sit together in the quiet of night, where the world slows down and the mind begins to breathe. Maybe you're lying in bed, the light from the hallway dimmed, the day's noise fading into soft background hums. Perhaps your heart carries the weight of a long day, questions unanswered, emotions tangled like wind-blown threads. But here's something to consider before you drift off. What if your mind is not merely observing life, but shaping it? Not just reacting, but planting the very seeds of what tomorrow becomes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin our journey together tonight. Let's begin with a simple truth, whispered by the Buddha long ago. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a vast garden. Somewhere inside you, there's soil still rich and waiting, soft with experience, lined with old roots of memory, and touched by the quiet rain of longing. And just like a garden, it responds not only to what is planted, but to how it is tended. Now picture this. Each thought you allow to linger is a seed. Every worry, every moment of gratitude, every judgment, every act of forgiveness, seed after seed. You see, no one escapes the harvest of their own mind. If you plant seeds of fear, the vines of anxiety will grow fast, curling around your days and nights. But if you plant seeds of compassion, patience and hope, what blossoms in your life is peace. In Buddhist teachings, this is not just a metaphor, it is a way of living. The concept of karma begins in thought. Action and intention are rooted in what the mind believes and feeds upon. There's a Zen story of a student who approached his master, troubled and scattered, saying, "Master, why does my life feel like chaos?" The master handed him a cup of tea and said nothing. After a few sips, the student asked again. The master quietly replied, "Because your thoughts are wild horses and you feed them every day." The student frowned. "Then what should I do?" The master smiled. "Stop feeding them." It's a curious thing how we keep feeding the very thoughts that make us suffer. But here's where your power lies, not in controlling every thought, but in choosing which ones to water. This is why mindfulness and meditation matter. They are not about escaping life. They are about noticing when you're about to plant the wrong seed and choosing again. What does your inner garden look like tonight? Are there brambles of old anger still taking up space? Are there forgotten flowers of kindness waiting to bloom again? You don't have to clear it all at once. Just start with one breath, one thought, one seed. And if tonight your only act is to rest with awareness, to listen with openness, you've already begun to cultivate peace. The Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path as a compass for our human journey. And the second step is right thought. That's no coincidence, because how you think becomes how you live. So ask yourself gently, as you begin to drift, what thoughts have I been planting lately, and which ones do I want to grow in the days to come? Let those questions settle softly into your mind, like dew on leaves. No need to answer right away, just breathe. The mirror of the mind. There is a simple yet powerful idea found at the heart of Buddhist psychology. The mind, when left unchecked, does not simply observe the world. It reflects it, reshapes it, and ultimately defines the quality of our experience. It's as if the mind is not a passive observer, but a living mirror. And like any mirror, it does not lie, but it does reflect back exactly what it's been shown. Imagine waking up each day and holding that mirror to the sky. If your thoughts are cloudy, the mirror shows you storms. If your thoughts are bitter, The mirror returns a world that tastes of disappointment. But when the thoughts are clear, loving, and grounded in presence, the mirror begins to show you beauty, even in the imperfect, even in the fleeting. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts we make the world, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, because perception is shaped by thought, and thought by habit. So much of what we call reality is simply what the mind has practiced seeing." You may have noticed this yourself. On days when you're anxious or self-critical, doesn't the world seem harsher? People appear colder, tasks feel heavier, the future looks dim, and yet on days when the mind is rested, peaceful, and even slightly grateful, the very same world feels softer, friendlier, more full of possibility. The mind doesn't just record experience, it colors it. This is why mental training, what Buddhism calls bhavana, is not some esoteric practice reserved for monks. It is a necessity for anyone who wants to live with less suffering. You do not need to retreat to a mountaintop or sit in a cave to begin. The true training begins exactly where you are, right now in the privacy of your own attention. There is an old Zen parable about a traveler who crossed a river at dusk. Halfway through the crossing, he noticed another small boat heading directly toward him. He shouted warnings, tried to steer away, but the boat kept coming. When it struck his boat, his frustration turned into rage. But when he looked closely, he saw the other boat was empty. No one had been steering it. The collision, it turned out, was not personal. In that moment, the traveler realized something profound. So many of our reactions, anger, hurt, blame, are not about what happened, but about the story our mind tells about it. We take things personally, we assume intention, and we react. But often, life is just drifting boats on a river. Not everything is aimed at us. The mind fills in intention where there is only circumstance. This is the power and danger of a reactive mind. When we don't train it to see clearly, it adds storylines where there were only facts. It projects shadows onto people who may have meant no harm. It turns neutral moments into personal wounds, and most painfully, it repeats these thought patterns until they feel like truth. But here's the grace: just as the mind can distort, it can also be polished. Just as a mirror can be covered with dust, it can also be gently wiped clean. The Buddhist path offers many tools to begin this process: mindfulness, right effort, loving kindness. But one of the most immediate is self-inquiry, a soft questioning, like placing a hand on the mind's shoulder and asking, "Is that true?" Not with judgment, not with force, but with gentle curiosity. When a critical thought arises, "I'm not enough, they don't care, everything is falling apart," try to hold it in the light for a moment. Is it a fact, or is it a habit of perception? Is it possible that this thought is simply an echo from the past, not a truth about the present? This gentle pause between thought and belief is where transformation begins. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a term, sem, which refers to the ordinary mind, the mind that chatters, judges, plans, fears, and compares. But beyond sem, there is rigpa, the clear and pure awareness that observes without clinging. The journey of practice is learning to shift from sem to rigpa more and more often, not by suppressing thoughts, but by seeing them clearly, as just clouds passing through the sky. Tonight, as you lie here, perhaps noticing your breath, or the gentle weight of your blanket, consider how your mind has been shaping your day. What did it focus on? What did it ignore? What stories did it tell? And which of those stories served you? This isn't about blaming yourself for negative thoughts. It's about realizing that you have a choice. A conscious mind is a free mind. And when you begin to polish the mirror, to become aware of what you're thinking and how those thoughts affect your emotional landscape, you begin to reclaim the power to see things as they really are. In this sense, Buddhism does not ask us to be cheerful or optimistic all the time. It asks us to be aware, to look at our mind the way a gardener looks at the soil, not with judgment, but with care. What is this thought planting? What will grow from this reaction? What kind of fruit will this perception bear? Remember, the mirror of the mind reflects whatever you show it most often, and what you feed it today will become the landscape of your life tomorrow. So, as you gently prepare to slip into sleep, allow this reflection to settle softly within you. What have you been feeding your mind, and what would you like it to reflect moving forward? Let these questions rest in the mirror of your own awareness, with no urgency to answer, only the quiet wisdom of noticing. We'll journey deeper in the next part. Guarding the gates within. There is a quiet gatekeeper that lives within each of us. You may not notice it often, but it stands at the threshold of your awareness, watching, absorbing, collecting. Everything you hear, see, taste, touch, and feel passes through these inner gates. In Buddhist teachings, this is known as sense door guarding, a profound practice that reminds us that peace is not only created by what we think, but also by what we allow into our consciousness. Take a moment now, as you listen in the stillness of this night, to reflect on all that has entered your mind today. The conversations you've overheard, the headlines that flashed across a screen, the expressions on strangers' faces, the words you read, even the background noise you barely noticed. Each one has been quietly absorbed by your inner world, like dye seeping into fabric. And the mind, so receptive, begins to take shape around these impressions. Buddhism teaches us that we do not suffer only because of external conditions, but because of how our minds process those conditions. When our inner gates are left unguarded, negativity and chaos from the outside world spill inward, often unnoticed. It's not just the loud, obvious messages that shape us. It's the subtle, repeated exposures, like raindrops on stone. They seem harmless, but over time they erode our peace. Imagine living in a house where every window is left open, all the time. Dust settles on the floor, insects wander in, noise leaks through, not because the house is broken, but because it was never protected. The same is true of our inner home, the sanctuary of the mind. Without awareness, we allow everything in, but with gentle mindfulness, we begin to close the windows that let in harm, and open only those that bring light and air. There is a Zen story of a student who asked his master, "How do I remain pure in a world so filled with impurity?" The master replied, "Walk through the mud, but do not sit in it." The message is simple. You cannot always avoid the world's chaos, but you can choose how long you linger in it, and how much of it you carry with you. In today's world, the gates are under constant pressure. The stream of information is endless, fast, and rarely gentle. It can be tempting to fill the silence with noise, scrolling, browsing, clicking from one thing to the next. But when we do this unconsciously, we're not just passing time. We're allowing the mind to be shaped by the lowest, loudest influences around us. And over time, this accumulation begins to influence how we think, feel, and respond. That's why guarding the gates doesn't mean shutting yourself off from the world. It means choosing what nourishes you, what uplifts you, what brings you back to center. It means noticing when a conversation leaves you agitated. It means turning off the news when it's no longer informative, but only disturbing. It means stepping back from environments that drain your energy or cloud your clarity. And it also means intentionally inviting in what soothes the spirit: kind voices, honest words, uplifting teachings, moments in nature, time spent with people who remind you of your better self. The Buddha often emphasized the importance of wise association. He taught that the company we keep, whether in person, in the books we read, or the voices we listen to, has the power to either uplift or undermine our inner practice. Like a drop of ink in a bowl of water, even one repeated influence can color the mind. That's why it matters who and what we surround ourselves with. Consider, too, the images you take in. The mind doesn't forget. Every violent scene, every angry headline, every shallow distraction builds residue, not all at once, but gradually. And one day, you find yourself feeling heavy and uncertain, without knowing why. But the mind has been digesting what it was given. And just like the body becomes what we eat, the mind becomes what we see, hear, and absorb. Yet this is not a call for perfection, nor a demand to withdraw from the world. Life will always present moments we cannot control. Rudeness from a stranger, a bit of gossip we overhear, sudden grief or disappointment. But we are not helpless. We can choose to meet those moments with awareness and choose again when it is time to let them go. There is a gentle practice I invite you to consider, especially at the close of each day. Before bed, take a few quiet minutes to review the day's impressions, what entered through your eyes, your ears, your heart. Which of those impressions are worth keeping, and which can be released like smoke on the wind? This isn't about analyzing every experience, but about cleansing the inner space, like sweeping the floors of a temple before closing its doors for the night. You can visualize this if it helps. Imagine yourself gently brushing away the clutter from your inner altar, clearing space for stillness, for quiet, for dreams that come without noise. As you lie here now, in the hush of night, perhaps your body resting more deeply into your mattress, ask yourself, what have I been allowing in lately? Have I been nourishing my peace, or exhausting it? Is it time to close a few windows, draw a few curtains, and restore the sanctity of my mind? Buddhism teaches that enlightenment doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, mindful choices, in the decision to turn off a source of negativity, in the practice of listening to something calming instead, in the courage to say, "This does not serve me," and choose again. Tonight you have already begun. You've chosen quiet over noise, reflection over distraction, presence over escape. And so, as your breath slows and your mind begins to loosen its grip on the day, may you feel the quiet guardianship returning. You are not helpless. You are the gatekeeper. You decide what stays, what goes, and what grows. So I invite you now to softly wonder, what will I welcome into my awareness tomorrow? And what is it time to stop inviting in? Let these questions rest in your heart, like lanterns in a garden, quietly glowing, needing no answer just yet. We will continue our journey with deeper steps in part 4. The noise of the world. Some nights, even when everything around us is still, we find that something inside us keeps humming, an invisible tension, a hum of unrest we can't quite silence. It may not be loud, but it's constant. It flickers beneath our thoughts, distracts us from rest, and sometimes follows us into our dreams. This is the subtle residue of a noisy world, a world that never stops speaking, never stops moving, never stops demanding our attention. In the time of the Buddha, people lived in forests, wandered barefoot through monastic grounds, and observed silence as a daily ritual. Today we wake to notifications, headlines, alarms, calendars. The world speaks to us even before we open our eyes, and it does not stop. Not when we eat, not when we rest, not even when we pray. The mind is pulled in every direction, like a candle in the wind, its flame flickering but never fully extinguished. And in this constant exposure to noise, digital, emotional, social, we forget how to hear our own thoughts clearly. Buddhist teachings remind us that peace is not something that arrives from the outside. Peace is something we must protect, something we must return to over and over again, like a wellspring hidden beneath the surface. The practice of mindfulness is not just about sitting in stillness. It is about noticing when we are being pulled out of stillness, when the mind begins to chase every sound, every story, every bit of noise that doesn't belong to us. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha spoke of mindfulness as a way of remaining aware amidst the world's distractions. He taught that we should notice the arising and passing away of each sensation, each thought, each impression, without becoming entangled in them. This teaching is more relevant now than ever before, for in today's age, distraction isn't the exception, it is the default. Many of us live on autopilot, caught in loops of reaction. We check our phones not because we need to, but because the silence feels strange. We scroll through feeds, not always out of curiosity, but from habit, seeking stimulation, even when it leaves us depleted. And without realizing it, the noise becomes normal, quiet becomes uncomfortable, and in that subtle shift, we lose touch with our inner compass. There is a Zen koan that asks, without speaking, without silence, can you tell me the truth? This paradox invites us to see beyond language, beyond noise, beyond even the absence of noise. The truth, it suggests, lives not in the extremes, but in the awareness that sees both. This is the power of a trained mind, not to eliminate all sound, but to remain centered amidst the noise. When we are surrounded by noise, be it from media, people, or our own restless thoughts, it becomes harder to know what we truly feel. Emotions become blurred, intentions confused. We might feel tired and assume we need more caffeine, when in truth, we need more stillness. We might feel restless and believe we must be productive, when in truth, we may need to rest or reflect. The voice of intuition, soft by nature, is often drowned out by the louder voices of culture, obligation, and expectation. But just as a lake clears when the wind stops stirring its surface, so too does the mind become clear when we withdraw from unnecessary input. Silence is not the absence of something, it is the presence of clarity. When we reduce the outer noise, we create the space for the inner voice to speak again. That's why in Buddhist monasteries, silence is not a punishment. It is a form of nourishment, a way to reset the nervous system, a way to come home to yourself. You don't need to become a monk or abandon your daily responsibilities to reclaim this silence. Even a few minutes of intentional quiet each day can restore the mind's natural rhythm. Turning off your phone for an hour, taking a walk without headphones, listening to the sound of your own breath before sleep. These are small acts of rebellion in a noisy world, and they are sacred. Tonight, as you lie in the softness of your room, you've already chosen a quieter path. Instead of absorbing more, you're allowing yourself to release. Instead of chasing thought, you are observing it. Instead of reacting, you are resting. This is not passive, this is powerful, for in choosing silence, you are choosing strength. The world will always have noise, some of it necessary, much of it not. But you have the capacity to filter, to discern, to turn the volume down on what does not serve your peace. You can create a boundary, not with force, but with intention. In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a term, noble silence. It is not simply the act of not speaking. It is the silence that arises from deep understanding, from clarity of mind, from compassion that no longer needs to defend or explain itself. This silence is not empty. It is full of wisdom, and when practiced, It teaches us that not all things deserve a reaction, not every invitation needs to be accepted, and not every bit of noise needs to enter our sacred space. So tonight, as the outer world begins to fade behind you, return gently to your own breath. Let it anchor you like a soft current, pulling you inward. And as you breathe, consider this: how much noise have I accepted as normal? And what would my life feel like with more sacred silence? There is no need to answer right away. Let the question rest beside you like a stone on still water. You've begun the journey back to your quiet center. The illusion of autopilot. There is a strange familiarity to the days when we move without thinking. We wake, we dress, we speak, we eat, but somewhere inside, we are not entirely present. It is as if a version of ourselves has taken over, operating the controls of daily life, while the deeper self, the watcher, the dreamer, the soul, sleeps quietly beneath the surface. This is the trance of autopilot, a subtle illusion that passes as normalcy in modern life. Autopilot is not always harmful. In fact, it evolved as a helpful function of the mind, conserving energy and simplifying repetitive tasks. But when it begins to extend beyond routine into our relationships, choices, emotions, and even identity, it can become a quiet thief, stealing the freshness from our moments and the clarity from our decisions. What begins as efficiency can turn into disconnection. In Buddhist philosophy, this state is referred to as avijja, a form of spiritual ignorance, or not seeing. Not seeing clearly what we are doing, why we are doing it, or even who we truly are in the moment. We become reactive instead of reflective, driven more by unconscious patterns than conscious awareness. And while life continues to move forward, we ourselves may feel stuck, like we're walking through fog, aware that we're moving but unsure if we are awake. Perhaps you've experienced this. A conversation where you say something you later regret, not out of intention, but because you were reacting from an old script. Or a day that passes without a single moment of true presence. No memory of what you ate, no recollection of how you got home, no sense of real connection to yourself or others. It's easy to brush off such moments as normal. But when they accumulate, they can leave us with a deep sense of numbness, of having missed something important, something sacred. The Buddha taught that the mind, when untrained, is like a monkey swinging from branch to branch, distracted, restless, seeking stimulation. But through mindfulness, we can interrupt the swing. We can pause the reactivity, however briefly, and create space for a different kind of response. This pause is the beginning of freedom. There is a Zen story of a student who approached his master in distress. "I feel like I'm always repeating the same mistakes," he said. "I try to be present, but I keep getting pulled into the same habits." The master nodded, then asked him to carry a cup of water across the garden without spilling a drop. The student accepted the task, walking slowly, carefully. When he returned, the master asked, "What were you thinking about as you walked?" "Only the water," said the student. The master smiled. "That is mindfulness. When the moment matters, you return to it." And so the practice becomes this: treat each moment as if it matters, because it does. The breath you take right now is unlike any before it. The thought you notice, the emotion you feel, the choice you make, each one is an invitation to step off the conveyor belt of unconsciousness and return to the living present. The mind likes repetition. It favors familiar patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve us. It replays old conversations, reacts to familiar triggers, reaches for the same distractions. But you are not your patterns. You are the awareness that sees the pattern. And with awareness comes the power to choose. This is where mindfulness becomes more than meditation. It becomes a way of being. When you wash the dishes, you feel the water on your hands. When you speak to a loved one, you listen with your whole attention. When anger rises, you notice it, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. When joy appears, you meet it fully, without rushing past. In this way, life becomes vivid again. Even the simplest rituals can be portals to presence. Lighting a candle before bed, sitting quietly with a warm drink, noticing the softness of the pillow beneath your head. These are not meaningless details. They are anchors, reminders that you are alive here now, not drifting in mental habits, but resting in sacred awareness. Of course, the pull of autopilot is strong. You may find yourself slipping back into old reactions, forgetting to pause, losing presence. This is not failure. This is the practice. To notice when you've gone unconscious, and to gently return again and again without judgment. Thich Nhat Hanh, a beloved Vietnamese Buddhist teacher, often spoke of returning to the breath as returning home. Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky, he said. Conscious breathing is my anchor, and so it can be for you. One breath to interrupt the pattern, one breath to choose again, one breath to remember yourself. Tonight as you lie here, maybe with your body beginning to release tension, your mind settling like a pond after a storm, let this be your practice. Notice how you are feeling, not what you think you should feel, not the story around the feeling, just the sensation itself. Where is there tightness? Where is there ease? Where is your mind trying to drift? Let it drift, then gently bring it back. Like a kind shepherd guiding their flock, lead your attention home, not with force, but with familiarity. The more often you do this, the more you'll begin to see when autopilot tries to take over. You'll catch it not with irritation, but with a small smile. You'll say, there you are again. And in that moment you are no longer asleep. You are awake. Because real freedom is not about avoiding every mistake or mastering every emotion. It's about noticing, interrupting, choosing, again and again. And so now as your breath softens and your limbs grow heavier with sleep, I invite you to wonder, where in my life am I most asleep? And what might it feel like to truly wake up, even for just one breath? Let that question linger, not as a pressure, but as a quiet opening. Tomorrow perhaps you'll see one small moment where you can step off autopilot and into presence. And from there, everything changes. The pause that frees you. There is a sacred space most of us overlook, not because it is hidden, but because it is so brief, so ordinary, that we often pass right through it without noticing. It exists in the sliver of time between stimulus and response. Someone says something sharp, a memory surfaces, a fear rises, the heart quickens, and before we realize it, we've reacted. Words leave our mouth, tension floods our body, choices unfold. But what if, just before that response, there was a pause, a breath, a moment to choose a different way? In Buddhism, this pause is everything. It is the ground of liberation. It is what transforms karma into mindfulness and habit into wisdom. The Buddha taught that in each moment of awareness, we reclaim our freedom, not by controlling the world around us, but by noticing how we respond to it. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of unimaginable suffering, echoed this truth in his own words. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. These are not just beautiful words. They are practical, spiritual instructions, and like many deep truths, they require practice. The modern world does not favor the pause. It rewards speed, decisiveness, and instant reaction. We are taught to fire back, to multitask, to speak before thinking, to move fast and process later. But wisdom moves in the opposite direction. Wisdom slows down. It listens more than it speaks. It waits until the water clears before acting. And in that slowness, something profound becomes possible: clarity. Consider how many of your most painful moments were born, not from what happened, but from how quickly you reacted. The argument that escalated because of one sharp reply, the choice you made while overwhelmed with emotion, the judgment you passed before understanding the full story. Autopilot, as we saw earlier, thrives on speed, but healing begins in slowness. There's a Zen story about a monk known for his serenity. A visitor, observing his calm demeanor, asked, "How is it that you never seem disturbed by anything?" The monk replied, "When I walk, I walk. When I eat, I eat. When I listen, I listen. When I feel anger arise, I pause, I wait, and then I decide what to do." That pause, small as it may seem, is the difference between unconscious reaction and conscious response. And you don't need years of monastic training to practice this. You can begin right now, here in the silence of your room, with the breath. The breath is the most immediate, reliable anchor we have. It is the body's way of pausing. The inhale invites awareness. The exhale releases tension, and between the two, between inhale and exhale, there is a stillness. A moment of perfect neutrality, a reminder that nothing must be rushed. You can use this pause anytime. When frustration rises, pause. When sadness swells, pause. When joy surprises you, pause again. Not to deny the feeling, but to give it space. To ask, what is this? Where is it coming from? What do I truly want to do here? In that inquiry, emotion softens and wisdom awakens. Some emotions shout, others whisper, but all emotions, when given the gift of attention, become less urgent and more clear. Anger, when paused upon, often reveals a wound beneath. Anxiety, when met with breath, shows us what we're afraid to lose. Even joy, when held with presence, deepens into gratitude rather than slipping into craving. Pausing does not mean hesitation. It does not mean indecision or avoidance. It is not passivity. It is power, because it is rooted in intention. The pause is not the absence of action. It is the presence of awareness. The Buddha often reminded his followers of the importance of sampajanya, clear comprehension. This quality refers not only to mindfulness but to wise understanding of one's context, intention, and impact. When we pause, we activate this faculty. We ask, is this thought skillful? Is this action necessary? Will this speech bring harm or healing? These reflections do not require hours. They require only a breath. Even in conflict, the pause can save relationships. Instead of replying with hurt, we respond with curiosity. Instead of defending, we seek to understand. Instead of speaking from ego, we speak from heart. One pause can change the entire course of a conversation or the entire shape of a day. Tonight, as you lie quietly, perhaps your breath slowing, your shoulders heavier against the bed, try noticing that space between each breath. Not doing anything with it, not forcing, just noticing. That gentle stillness between inhale and exhale is your doorway to presence, to choice, to peace. The truth is, many of life's most destructive patterns are simply reactions that were never interrupted. But once you become aware of them, once you pause, even for a second, you are no longer trapped by them. You are free to choose another path. You may still feel the same anger, the same grief, the same uncertainty, but your relationship to it begins to shift. And from that shift comes transformation. So as you prepare to sleep, perhaps already sensing the edges of dream drawing near, hold this reflection in your heart. Where in my life do I most need to pause? And what wisdom might I hear if I gave myself just one more breath before reacting? There is no need to fix or answer. Just ask. Let the question float gently through your mind, like a lantern across a quiet lake. And in the stillness of that wondering, you may begin to feel the truth that has always waited for you in silence. You are not the reaction. You are the awareness that sees the reaction and the space that lovingly holds it. We'll continue this path of transformation through suffering and strength in Part 7. Suffering as sacred teacher. There are times in life when suffering arrives unannounced. It may take the shape of loss, illness, disappointment, loneliness, or the quiet ache of unmet longing. Sometimes it shouts, other times it lingers in the background, soft but relentless. In these moments, it can feel like we've been cast into shadow, as if life has pulled away its warmth, leaving us to sit with only our pain. And yet in Buddhist thought, suffering is not an enemy. It is a sacred teacher, one that arrives not to punish us, but to wake us. The Buddha's very first teaching after his enlightenment was on the truth of suffering, dukkha. He did not offer denial or distraction, but recognition. There is suffering, he said, not as condemnation, but as observation. Life, by its nature, involves discomfort, change, impermanence, grief. But suffering itself is not the end of the story. In fact, it is only the beginning. To understand suffering, the Buddha taught, is to begin the path to freedom, not by avoiding pain, but by turning toward it with awareness. In doing so, we begin to see that suffering contains within it the seeds of insight. Pain, while never desirable, can refine us. It strips away illusions, forces stillness, and invites us to ask questions we may have long ignored. Think back to a time in your life when you were deeply hurt. Perhaps you felt broken, lost, unsure of who you were. But wasn't it in that rawness that you discovered something unexpected? Perhaps the kindness of a friend, the resilience you didn't know you had, the tenderness you began to extend toward yourself. These are the hidden gifts of suffering, not in the pain itself, but in how we choose to meet it. There is an old Zen tale of a monk who carried a heavy sack of rice up a mountain each day. One evening, a traveler asked him, "Why do you burden yourself so?" The monk replied, "Because the weight teaches me patience, and in patience I find peace." The traveler looked puzzled. "Isn't peace the absence of burden?" The monk shook his head. "No, peace is the ability to carry it with awareness." This is the subtle wisdom of Buddhist practice, not to wish suffering away, but to sit with it, breathe with it, and listen to what it has to teach. When we resist pain, we add a second layer of suffering, but when we soften into it, something shifts. The pain may still be there, but it no longer owns us. We begin to realize that pain is a wave, but we are the ocean. Buddhist monks often practice in austere conditions, waking early, sleeping little, eating simply, enduring heat, cold, and long hours of meditation. To an outsider, it may seem harsh, even unnecessary, but to the practitioner, these conditions are not punishment. They are training. Discomfort becomes a tool for cultivating virya, energy, perseverance, and spiritual strength. By willingly engaging with challenge, they develop inner spaciousness, the ability to meet life's difficulties with balance and grace. And yet, suffering is not reserved for monks. Everyday life offers enough of it to go around. The loss of a loved one, the fear of aging, the uncertainty of illness, the disappointment of dreams not realized. These too are opportunities for awakening. They invite us to examine what we cling to, what we fear, and what we believe defines us. When we suffer, we often ask, "Why me?" But a more helpful question might be, "What is this asking me to learn?" Not as a way to justify the pain, but as a doorway into understanding. Maybe the lesson is to slow down. Maybe it is to let go. Maybe it is to ask for help. Or perhaps the lesson is simply to be more present with yourself, to meet your own heart with compassion instead of criticism. Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote, "Suffering is not enough." He meant that while suffering is inevitable, we need not stop there. We can hold suffering with mindfulness, with tenderness, and even with curiosity. And in doing so, we begin to touch something deeper than pain, something whole and unbreakable within us. There is a Buddhist image of the lotus flower, a symbol of purity and spiritual awakening. But what makes the lotus remarkable is not its beauty, it is its origin. The lotus blooms from the mud. Without the mud, there would be no flower. And so it is with us. Our deepest growth often rises from our darkest soil. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps reflecting on some sorrow you still carry, know that this too can be part of your path. You don't have to force it into meaning. You don't need to pretend that it's okay, but you can offer it space. A breath, a moment of gentleness. Let your suffering know that it is seen, that you are listening, that you will not abandon yourself in the face of pain. And as you lie there, with the rhythm of your breath softening like waves along the shore, ask yourself gently, what is my suffering trying to teach me? And how might I meet it with more kindness, more patience, more grace? You may not know the answer tonight, and that's perfectly fine. The act of asking is enough. It opens the heart. It clears the fog. It lets the light in. We'll walk further into that light in part 8. The Monastery of Difficulty. There are places in the world that shape us through silence and stillness, temples, mountains, forests. But there are also monasteries we do not choose, places of learning that come to us disguised as hardship, illness, heartbreak, isolation, failure. These are not the spaces we would willingly enter, yet they become our teachers all the same. In Buddhist thought, difficulty is not separate from the path, it is the path. Many spiritual traditions speak of sacred spaces, places where the veil between ordinary life and truth grows thin. But what if that sacred space is not a physical place at all, but a moment of personal struggle? What if your most challenging experience is not evidence of something going wrong, but an invitation to wake up more deeply? The Buddha's life offers us an example. He did not reach enlightenment in a palace, surrounded by comfort. He left everything familiar behind. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree and faced every temptation, every fear, every form of inner resistance. It was only after wrestling with Mara, the personification of illusion, doubt and desire, that clarity dawned. Enlightenment did not come through escape. It came through enduring, through seeing clearly, moment by moment, and not turning away. This is the heart of the lesson. When difficulty arises, we often want to run, to distract ourselves, to find the quickest path out. But in Buddhist practice, we are invited to stay, not to prolong pain, but to observe it with honesty, to soften into it, and to let it refine us. Pain becomes our monastery. The hardship itself becomes the training ground. You do not need robes or rituals to be a monk in this sense. You simply need willingness to stay present when life is uncomfortable, to breathe through the storm rather than bracing against it, to ask not, how can I escape this, but how can I grow within it? There is a story from the Zen tradition of a young student who visited a teacher, frustrated by a season of difficulty. "I want to deepen my practice," the student said, "but life keeps getting in the way. My relationships are strained, my work is unstable, and I feel lost." The teacher listened, then replied, "Then your life is your monastery. These conditions you resist, they are your training." The words surprised the student. "But how can suffering be part of the path?" The teacher responded, "Because peace, that is only possible in comfort, is not peace at all. Real peace is the one that survives the storm." In this way, suffering becomes the great equalizer, the silent temple that all of us enter at some point. And once inside, we are stripped of pretense. The ego cannot hide in hardship. It is there, in the rawness of difficulty, that we begin to see our attachments, our fears, our illusions. And with clarity comes the possibility of freedom. This does not mean glorifying suffering or seeking out pain. Buddhism is clear. The goal is not to suffer more, but to suffer less through understanding. But when suffering does come, as it inevitably will, we can meet it differently. Not with resistance, but with curiosity. Not with despair, but with presence. One of the most powerful qualities we can develop in the Monastery of Difficulty is upekkha, or equanimity. It is the quiet strength that allows us to remain centered amidst extremes, to feel sorrow without drowning, to experience joy without clinging, to hold both without losing ourselves. Equanimity is not indifference. It is spaciousness. It is the ability to remain rooted while the winds of life blow in every direction. You may already know this strength. Perhaps there was a time when you faced a painful experience, loss, betrayal, change, and found, beneath the surface, a stillness that surprised you. A sense that even though everything was uncertain, something within you remained intact. That stillness is the fruit of practice, even if you didn't know you were practicing. Because, in truth, we are always practicing. Every moment of difficulty is a choice point, to numb or to notice, to react or to reflect, to armor up or to open. And every time we choose presence over avoidance, we grow a little stronger, not harder, not colder, but wiser and more tender at once. As you lie here now, perhaps remembering your own difficult seasons, consider what they gave you, not what they took, but what they taught. Did you discover a new depth of patience, a clearer sense of what matters, a capacity for empathy you hadn't touched before? These lessons are not always obvious. Some are revealed years later, but all of them live in you now, shaping who you've become. So let this be a kind of blessing. May your challenges become your teachers. May your pain refine your compassion. May your difficulty lead you not into bitterness, but into clarity. And may you learn to sit in the monastery of hardship without forgetting the light that also lives in you. Tonight, your room is that monastery. Not because you are suffering, but because you are paying attention. You are listening inwardly. You are breathing slowly. You are allowing life in all its imperfection to be enough. And as sleep draws closer, as your body grows heavier and your breath more even, let this reflection settle gently within you. What is the most important lesson a difficult season has taught me? And how can I honor that wisdom now? No need to force an answer. Just hold the question as you would hold a fragile gift, carefully, reverently. We'll continue this path into gentler terrain in part 9. Gratitude in the smallest things. There is a quiet shift that happens when the mind begins to soften, when we are no longer chasing extraordinary moments, but instead starting to notice the quiet blessings tucked inside the ordinary. The warmth of a teacup between your hands, the subtle glow of afternoon light on the wall, the sound of a distant bird just before dawn, These are the small things, so easy to overlook, so easily dismissed, and yet when seen with awareness, they become doorways to deep contentment. In Buddhist teaching, gratitude is not a passing emotion or a polite response. It is a conscious practice, a way of shaping the mind toward joy. It's not about pretending everything is fine or forcing a smile through hardship. Gratitude is subtler than that. It is the willingness to pause and say, even quietly, this too is enough. The Buddha often warned of tanha, craving, this insatiable thirst for more comfort, more achievement, more affirmation is the root of much of our suffering. When we are always reaching, always scanning the horizon for something better, we overlook the ground beneath our feet. But gratitude, gently practiced, turns our gaze back toward the present. It reveals not what we lack, but what we already hold. It begins with a small noticing, a shift from absence to presence. You might be sitting at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside you, the day beginning to stir. You feel tired, perhaps burdened by thoughts of what must be done. But then if you pause, you might feel the softness of your sweater, hear the steady rhythm of your breath, or simply become aware of the way light touches the rim of your cup. And suddenly, without effort, you are no longer waiting for something better. You are here, and it is enough. There is a story from the Buddhist tradition about a young monk who came to his teacher saying, "I feel stuck. I meditate. I follow the teachings, but I still feel empty." The teacher handed him a bowl and said, "Go into the forest and collect one thing each day that brings you peace." The monk returned each evening with a single item, a smooth stone, a fallen leaf, a piece of fruit. Over time, his bowl filled. When the teacher finally spoke, he said, "Your mind is like this bowl. Fill it each day with simple joys, and emptiness will fade on its own." The practice of gratitude is like that. It is not about listing grand achievements or rewriting your entire story. It's about picking up the small stones of your day, the smile from a stranger, the way a breeze brushes past your face, the feeling of your body finally relaxing into bed, and placing them gently in your heart. Scientific studies have echoed what Buddhist teachers have known for centuries. Gratitude changes the brain. It shifts our focus from fear to appreciation, from scarcity to sufficiency. It lowers stress, strengthens relationships, and even improves sleep. But these benefits do not come from occasional gratitude. They come from deliberate, consistent noticing, from choosing, again and again, to look kindly at your life. This is especially powerful during difficult times. When life feels heavy, gratitude is not about ignoring the pain. It's about remembering that pain is never the whole story. Even in grief there can be moments of peace. Even in chaos there are glimmers of stillness. To say, "I am grateful," does not mean I am not hurting. It means I am still alive to beauty, even here. You might begin each day by asking yourself, what is one thing I'm thankful for right now? Not yesterday, not tomorrow, just now. Perhaps it's the comfort of a familiar voice, the taste of something sweet, the presence of silence. Let that awareness land softly in your mind, without needing to explain or justify it. And if you forget, that's okay. Gratitude is not another task to perform. It's a rhythm to return to, like breath, like kindness, like truth. Tonight as you lie in bed, wrapped in the quiet of your own space, notice one small thing that comforts you. It might be the texture of your pillow, the scent of the air, or the memory of someone you love. Let that thing, however small, be enough. Let it root you here in the safety of now. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi teaches us to find beauty in the imperfect, the transient, the incomplete, a chipped bowl, a wrinkled hand, a rainy morning. These are not flaws to be fixed. They are invitations to appreciate what is real. Gratitude allows us to see in this way, not through the lens of perfection, but through the eyes of tenderness. If you look closely, your life is already full of unnoticed gifts, of forgotten comforts, of tiny miracles hiding in plain sight. The purpose of this practice is not to deny what is hard. It is to hold what is hard alongside what is good. And so, as your breath slows and the day releases its hold, ask yourself gently, what small thing today did I almost overlook? And how might I remember to see it tomorrow? Let the question drift like mist across the surface of your mind. No urgency, no pressure, just a quiet invitation to keep your eyes and heart open. We'll continue this gentle turning of the mind in part 10. Enough as you are, there is a quiet longing that lives inside many of us, a sense that we are not yet complete, that we must become more, achieve more, prove more, before we can truly rest. This longing often goes unnamed, but it shapes our days. It shows up in the way we strive, in the way we compare ourselves, in the subtle pressure to always improve, always be better. And beneath it, there is a question that rarely leaves us: am I enough? From the Buddhist perspective, this question is not only understandable, it's one of the core illusions of the ego. The mind, shaped by habit and culture, constantly seeks identity and validation. It measures, categorizes, and clings. It imagines that peace lies just beyond the next accomplishment or affirmation. But the deeper truth, the one repeated gently across centuries of teachings, is that you do not need to become more in order to be worthy of rest. You are already whole, already complete, not because you have fulfilled every goal, but because your nature itself is enough. The Buddha taught that the self we cling to is impermanent and conditioned. In the doctrine of anatta, or non-self, he reminded us that the labels we carry, mother, teacher, achiever, failure, are not who we truly are. They are garments of experience, woven from memory and expectation, but they are not our essence. When we peel them away, even for a moment, what remains is presence, awareness, a heart capable of compassion and peace. Imagine for a moment that you are not a project to be fixed, but a being to be understood. Not a problem to be solved, but a life to be lived. What would change if you stopped trying to earn your own rest? What would soften if you believed that right now, even with your doubts and imperfections, you are already enough? There is a Zen koan that asks, who were you before your parents were born? It is not a question meant to be answered, but to be felt. Beneath the layers of identity, who are you? Beneath the striving, what remains? When all effort ceases, when all roles fall silent, there is a quiet presence within you that simply is. That presence does not need to prove itself. It does not compete. It does not chase. It simply exists. And in that existence, there is peace. Many people misunderstand spiritual practice as self-improvement, but in truth, it is self-acceptance. It is the gentle process of remembering what is already whole. Mindfulness is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It is about seeing yourself clearly, without distortion, without judgment, and realizing that nothing needs to be added in order to be worthy of love. Think of how a child rests when they are tired. They do not ask whether they've earned their sleep. They do not question whether their day was productive enough. When the body calls for rest, they surrender to it. Somewhere along the way, we forget how to do this. We replace rest with guilt, stillness with anxiety, being with doing. But the invitation remains to return to that original trust, to remember that you are not valuable because of what you produce, but simply because you are here, breathing, alive. Gratitude, as we explored earlier, helps shift the mind toward sufficiency, but self-acceptance takes it one step further. It turns that gaze inward and says, "Even I, just as I am worthy of gratitude." This is not arrogance. It is not pride. It is the recognition that the same awareness that exists in the trees, in the sky, in the breath, exists in you. You are part of the great unfolding, no less sacred than anything else. In one Buddhist story, a student complains to his teacher, "I feel like I'm failing. My practice is not consistent. My thoughts are a mess. I don't feel peaceful." The teacher smiles and pours him tea. As the cup fills, he says, "This cup does not ask whether it deserves to be filled. It simply receives. Can you do the same?" The student nods slowly, understanding at last that peace is not something we earn. It is something we allow. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, perhaps already beginning to drift into the soft contours of sleep, consider what it might mean to let yourself be enough. Let go for now of the to-do lists, the unfinished plans, the old regrets. None of them belong in this moment. What belongs here is your breath, your body, your presence. What belongs here is you, unadorned, unmeasured, at ease. There is nothing you need to fix before resting, nothing you need to prove before softening. In the eyes of the Dharma, you are not broken, you are unfolding. And in that unfolding, every moment, even this quiet one, is sacred. Perhaps tomorrow you will strive again. Perhaps the world will call you to effort and growth. That is fine, that is part of life. But tonight, the invitation is different. Tonight, the invitation is to stop running, to stop improving, to stop striving, and to simply be. So as your breath slows, as your muscles release the weight they have carried, ask yourself gently, what would it feel like to stop trying to be more, and to rest fully in the truth that I am already enough? Let the question float softly across the surface of your awareness, like moonlight on water. No answer needed, just presence, just being. The mind as canvas. Imagine your mind not as a fixed object, but as a living canvas, soft, spacious, receptive. Each thought, emotion, or image that moves through your awareness becomes a brushstroke, adding shape and texture to the landscape of your inner world. Over time, patterns begin to form, some deliberate, others accidental, some filled with color and harmony, others shaded with fear or doubt. But what remains true always is this: you are the artist, and every moment is an opportunity to paint something new. In Buddhist practice, this truth is both empowering and humbling. The mind is not something we are chained to, nor something we must endlessly repair. It is something we shape through intention, through habit, through practice. The Buddha taught that the mind becomes what it thinks. This is not metaphor. It is the law of bhavana, or mental cultivation. Just as a garden yields what is planted, the mind gives rise to whatever it is repeatedly exposed to. It can be easy to forget this, especially when life feels chaotic or overwhelming. We might assume our moods are purely reactions to outer circumstances. We feel irritable, so we blame the traffic. We feel anxious, so we point to the headlines. We feel unmotivated and think something must be wrong with us. But what if much of what we feel is the echo of what we've allowed to occupy our minds? What if the mind, like a canvas left outside, begins to take on the colors of its surroundings without us even noticing? This is where visualization becomes more than daydreaming. It becomes a deliberate act of painting, a sacred way of choosing what kind of image we want to live with and live into. In Tibetan Buddhism, visualization is a deeply rooted meditative tool. Practitioners often visualize deities not as external gods, but as representations of enlightened qualities within themselves: compassion, wisdom, clarity. By imagining these qualities vividly, they begin to awaken those same qualities inside. You don't need elaborate rituals to do this. You can begin simply, right now as you lie in bed, with your eyes closed and the world growing softer around you. Imagine the kind of person you most long to be, not in a future tense faraway way, but as if you already were that person. Picture yourself patient, kind, unshakably calm. See how your body moves when you feel at ease. Imagine the sound of your voice when you speak from compassion. Feel your breath steady and deep, rooted in peace. This is not fantasy. This is rehearsal. This is the mind learning a new pattern. Studies in neuroscience support what Buddhist teachers have always known: the brain changes based on repeated imagery. When you visualize calm, the brain lights up in the same regions it would if you were truly calm. When you see yourself being generous, loving, resilient, those pathways grow stronger. Slowly, gently, your behavior begins to align with your vision, not because you force it, but because you've prepared the inner conditions for it to arise. This practice also offers a gentle antidote to self-judgment. So often we repeat images of failure in our minds. We replay mistakes. We visualize rejection, conflict, or embarrassment, sometimes without realizing it. These mental habits deepen our suffering, not because they reflect truth, but because the mind believes what it sees. Visualization, when guided with compassion, interrupts this cycle. It gives the mind a new image to hold, a kinder mirror to look into. There is a Zen saying, "Wherever the mind goes, energy follows." When you imagine yourself already living in a state of peace or wisdom, your energy starts to gather there, and over time that energy begins to radiate outward into action. You begin to respond with more patience. You make choices more aligned with your values. You pause more often. You listen more deeply. Not because someone told you to, but because the inner image has changed, and so the outer behavior shifts to match. It's important to remember, though, that visualization is not about perfection. You will still have days when you feel small, afraid, reactive. The mind will still wander. But visualization is not a test. It is a return. Each time you revisit the image of who you truly are, you deepen your relationship with that version of yourself. You give it warmth, light, space to grow. Tonight you might visualize a peaceful version of yourself, perhaps walking slowly through a forest path, or sitting by a window with soft morning light on your face. You might imagine yourself greeting others with ease, listening without needing to fix, smiling for no reason at all. Or perhaps you simply see yourself resting, your body soft, your thoughts gentle, your heart open. Whatever the image, let it be enough. Let it settle into your mind, like a brushstroke on canvas. No need to perfect it. Just allow it to take shape. There is great humility in this practice too, because once you understand how easily the mind is shaped by images, you become more careful about what you expose it to. You start to protect your mental canvas. You choose gentler colors. You spend more time with people and teachings that reflect the kind of life you want to paint. And slowly your mind becomes a place you want to return to, not a battlefield, but a sanctuary. So as you rest here now, breathing in this space of quiet reflection, ask yourself, what images have I been holding in my mind, and what new ones am I ready to create? You don't need to answer aloud. The question itself begins the shift. Let it echo softly through your awareness as you drift into sleep, where the mind continues to shape and be shaped, even in dreams. Becoming before becoming, there is a curious paradox on the path of transformation. To truly become something, we must first imagine ourselves already being it, not as a fantasy, not as self-deception, but as a quiet recognition of the potential that already lives within us. This is the essence of becoming before becoming, seeing the seed, even before the flower blooms. In the teachings of the Buddha, this is not wishful thinking, it is mental training. Just as we train the body through repetition, we train the mind by aligning our thoughts, intentions, and attention with the qualities we wish to embody. And over time, that alignment becomes identity, not because we have forced it, but because we have nourished it. You do not wait until you feel brave to act with courage. You act with courage, and over time, you become brave. You do not wait until you are perfectly peaceful to practice patience. You practice patience, and peace arises as a result. The journey of becoming begins long before the outcome is visible. It begins in your inner world, in the way you speak to yourself, in the images you carry, and in the choices you make, moment by moment. Buddhism emphasizes intention, cetana, as the heart of karma. Intention precedes action, and action shapes reality. This means that how you imagine yourself, how you hold yourself inwardly, matters. If you walk through your day believing you are scattered, reactive, or unworthy, the mind will reinforce that perception, and your actions will subtly follow. But if instead you begin to hold the image of someone who responds with clarity, who pauses before reacting, who sees themselves as whole, your energy shifts, your posture changes, your breath deepens, your thoughts move with greater ease, and gradually, without fanfare, you grow into the person you have already begun to see. This doesn't mean ignoring your flaws or pretending to be something you're not. It means learning to trust the process of internal alignment. You are not pretending to be compassionate. You are uncovering the compassion that was always available to you. You are not fabricating calm. You are remembering what calm feels like and making space for it to stay. There is a Zen story of a student who asked his teacher, "How do I become enlightened?" The teacher replied, "There is no becoming. Just stop believing you are separate from it." The student frowned, "But I don't feel enlightened." The teacher smiled, "Then practice feeling it until the illusion of separation dissolves." This practice is not performance. It is presence. It is being with yourself as you would be with a beloved friend, not waiting for perfection, but meeting each moment with sincerity and care. Perhaps you've noticed this in your own life. When you hold yourself with kindness, you behave more kindly toward others. When you begin the day believing you are capable, small challenges don't shake you as deeply. When you see yourself as steady, you naturally begin to breathe more slowly, listen more deeply, and speak with more thoughtfulness. These are not miracles, they are subtle shifts, inner mirrors reflecting outward behavior. It's important to acknowledge that there will still be moments when you feel disconnected from your ideal self. You may lose your temper, forget your intention, speak carelessly, or fall into old patterns. That's not failure, that's being human. What matters is not perfection, but the return, the gentle, persistent act of realigning, of noticing when you've drifted and choosing again. Each time you visualize your best self, not as someone distant, but as someone already here, you give that version of yourself a little more room to breathe. You start to act as if you are already calm, even when the world is not, as if you are already wise, even when you don't have all the answers, as if you are already loving, even when it's difficult. And in doing so, you give those qualities space to grow. There's a powerful idea in Buddhist psychology that the mind and heart are inherently trainable. No quality is fixed, no habit is permanent, No self is final. The person you were yesterday does not confine the person you can be today, and the person you are becoming is already whispering within you, waiting for space, not permission. Tonight, as your body softens further into rest, consider this: you are not as far from your ideal self as you think. The qualities you seek are not outside of you. They are dormant seeds, already planted, already waiting. The more you imagine yourself living with those qualities, the more your actions begin to reflect them, and the more your actions reflect them, the more the mind believes they are real. So let this be your practice, quietly, without pressure. See yourself as kind, not just when it's easy, but when you are challenged. See yourself as grounded, not just when life is calm, but when it is noisy. See yourself as free, not because you have escaped difficulty, but because you have learned to meet it with grace. You are already in the process of becoming. You have been since the beginning, and each breath you take with intention is another brushstroke on that unfolding image. So now, as your thoughts begin to slow and your breath begins to deepen, ask yourself, what would it feel like to live as if I were already the person I long to be? What small act, even now, could bring me closer to that version of myself? Let the questions rest gently within you, like soft earth holding a seed. There is no rush. Becoming is not a race. It is a rhythm, and you are already part of it. The softness of self-compassion. There is a kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't push, doesn't dominate. It's the strength of softness, the quiet resilience that comes not from forcing life into order, but from meeting it and ourselves with tenderness. In a world that often tells us to strive harder, to do more, to be better, the idea of softening can feel almost rebellious. Yet in Buddhism, this softening is not weakness. It is the doorway to true liberation. The Buddha taught that compassion is the path to awakening, not only for others, but for ourselves. Metta, or loving kindness, begins with how we treat the one person we will be with every moment of our lives, ourselves. And yet, for so many of us, this is where compassion falters. We offer patience to strangers, grace to friends, but turn inward with sharpness, with judgment, with subtle self-rejection. Think of how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, when you feel inadequate, when your plans fall apart. Would you speak to a child, a loved one, a friend in that same tone? Most likely not. And yet we allow those words to echo inside, unchecked, unsoftened, shaping our inner world without realizing it. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It's not letting ourselves off the hook or avoiding accountability. It is the willingness to hold ourselves gently in the midst of our human imperfections. It is remembering that failure is part of the path, that struggle is part of growth, that being human means sometimes being uncertain, vulnerable, and afraid. The Buddhist path does not demand perfection. It invites awareness. When we notice suffering within ourselves, the practice is not to fix it immediately, but to meet it with kindness, to say quietly, "This hurts, and that's okay. I am still worthy of love, even in this moment." There is a story often told in Buddhist circles about a teacher who asked her students to imagine holding a glass of water. "How heavy is this glass?" she asked. The students guessed 8 ounces, maybe 16. The teacher shook her head. "The weight doesn't matter. What matters is how long you hold it. Hold it for a minute. It's light. An hour, and it begins to ache. A day, and your arm goes numb." The same is true of self-criticism. The longer you carry it, the heavier it becomes. Self-compassion is the practice of putting the glass down. It begins with noticing when the inner critic has taken the lead. Perhaps you feel tense without knowing why, or restless, or stuck in a loop of not enough. When you pause, breathe and listen, you may hear the tone of that voice. Is it harsh? Is it disappointed? Is it afraid? Once you recognize it, you can begin to shift it, not by silencing it, but by speaking back with kindness. I hear you, you might say, but I choose a gentler way. In formal practice, this takes the shape of metta bhavana, the cultivation of loving kindness. We begin with ourselves, repeating phrases like, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be at peace. At first it can feel awkward, unfamiliar, even undeserved. But slowly the repetition begins to soften the edges of self-judgment. The mind grows more willing to accept care. The heart begins to open inward, not just outward. Forgiveness plays a role here too. Many of us carry the weight of old mistakes, of words we wish we could take back, of versions of ourselves we no longer recognize. We think, if only I had known better, if only I had been stronger. But the truth is, we did the best we could with what we knew at the time. Forgiveness does not mean denying the past. It means releasing ourselves from the grip of regret. The Buddha once said, you yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. It's a radical statement, because for many, the hardest person to love is oneself. But this love is not based on merit. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is a recognition of shared humanity. Just as others suffer, so do we. Just as others make mistakes, so do we. And just as others are deserving of compassion, so are we. Self-compassion also teaches us how to begin again, every day, every hour, if needed. When we falter, when we forget, when we fall short of our intentions, we can return. No guilt, no shame, just breath and presence, and the willingness to begin anew. This too is strength, the quiet strength of not giving up on yourself. As you lie here now, in the stillness of night, notice how your body feels. Is there tension in your chest, tightness in your jaw, a subtle holding in your belly? These are often signs that we've been hard on ourselves, even without realizing it. Soften. Let the breath move in and out like a tide, gently loosening whatever you've been holding. If it feels right, place a hand over your heart or on your stomach. Feel the warmth of your own presence. This body, this mind, this spirit, you have carried them through so much. You have endured, adapted, and grown, even in silence. Let that be enough, just for now. Self-compassion is not a destination. It is a practice, a returning, a remembering. Each time you offer it to yourself, you break a little more of the old cycle of harshness. And as you grow softer with yourself, you will find that your softness toward others deepens too. So, as you rest here now, letting sleep draw near, ask yourself this simple question: how might I be gentler with myself tomorrow? And what might change if I offered myself the same compassion I offer to others? Let the question float gently through your awareness, like a feather carried on air. There's nothing to fix, nothing to prove, only a heart learning, slowly and tenderly, to love what it finds within. The river that forgives. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. We imagine it as a single act, a moment of dramatic release, or a magnanimous gesture extended to someone else. But in the teachings of Buddhism, forgiveness is not a favor granted to another. It is a liberation granted to ourselves. Not a one-time event, but a flowing current, a river that moves through us, washing away the hardened places we no longer need to carry. It is said in the Dhammapada, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not weakness. It is an act of inner freedom, a refusal to allow resentment, guilt, or shame to occupy sacred space in the heart. And yet, Many of us find forgiveness difficult, not just for others, but especially for ourselves. We carry the past like stones in our pockets. We replay old scenes in our minds. We revisit conversations that are long over, picking at them like unhealed wounds. We tell ourselves we should have known better, done better, said something different. But these judgments do not change the past. They only anchor us to it. Forgiveness begins not with erasing what happened, but with softening our relationship to it. It's the gentle acknowledgement that we have suffered, that others have suffered, and that carrying that pain forward will not ease the weight. It is the understanding that what we refuse to forgive, whether in ourselves or in others, keeps us tethered to suffering. It narrows our world. It dims our light. There is a story from the Buddhist tradition of two monks who were walking together along a muddy road after a heavy rain. As they passed a village, they saw a woman in fine silk clothes, unable to cross the puddle without soaking her garments. Without hesitation, the older monk lifted her and carried her across. She thanked him, and the two monks continued on in silence. Hours later, the younger monk burst out, "How could you do that? We took vows never to touch a woman." The older monk replied calmly, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This is the heart of forgiveness, setting down what no longer serves. We may not forget. We may not fully understand. But we can choose not to carry the pain further than we need to. We can choose to release the grip. In our own lives, the people we struggle to forgive are often the ones who have caused us the most pain, or who have reflected something we dislike in ourselves. But forgiveness does not mean condoning harmful behavior. It does not mean allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Rather, it means refusing to let another person's actions dictate our peace. It means choosing healing over revenge, stillness over inner chaos. And when it comes to ourselves, the practice is even more tender. Buddhism invites us to look deeply at the concept of karma, cause and effect, not as punishment, but as an opportunity to learn. Every action we've taken, every word we've spoken, every mistake we've made has arisen from conditions, our upbringing, our pain, our fears, our ignorance at the time. When we begin to see ourselves through this compassionate lens, we can begin to forgive, not to excuse, but to understand. And from understanding comes release. Forgiveness is not always instant. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, like petals opening to the sun. Sometimes it must be revisited, again and again, like returning to a river to be cleansed. And that is okay. The practice is not perfection. The practice is presence. There is a meditation in Buddhist traditions where one repeats silently, "If I have hurt anyone, knowingly or unknowingly, in thought, word or deed, I ask for their forgiveness. And then, if anyone has hurt me, knowingly or unknowingly, in thought, word or deed, I forgive them. And finally, if I have hurt myself, knowingly or unknowingly, in thought, word or deed, I forgive myself." This practice is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost imperceptible. But over time, it begins to soften the walls that separate us from peace. Tonight, as you rest here, let yourself imagine a river flowing gently through your heart. Not a rushing flood, just a slow, steady current. See it moving through the corners of your mind where resentment still hides, through the memories that feel tight or sharp, through the regrets you still hold about things done or left undone. Let the river move freely. Let it carry what no longer needs to stay. If there is someone in your life you are not ready to forgive, that's okay. Just be with the feeling. Acknowledge it. No force, no pressure. Forgiveness begins in honesty, and sometimes that honesty says, "I'm not ready yet." Even that is a step toward healing. If there's a version of yourself you still punish for past mistakes, try offering that younger self some grace. Remember, they were trying, perhaps clumsily, perhaps imperfectly, but trying nonetheless. Hold them now with the wisdom you've gained, and let them rest. And if the words won't come, let your breath be the offering. Inhale, softening, exhale, releasing, over and over, until the tightness begins to loosen, until the current starts to flow. As you begin to drift towards sleep, you might gently ask yourself, what am I still carrying that I no longer need to hold? And how would it feel to let it flow downstream? Let the question float through your awareness like a leaf on the surface of a quiet river. No need to grasp it, just let it move. Let it carry what it must. A mind like still water. There is a state the mind can enter, not through force or mastery, but through quiet surrender, where everything becomes clear, and yet nothing needs to be understood. A state where the thoughts no longer pull, and the heart no longer clings. It's not a grand awakening, nor a final destination. It's simply this: stillness. Buddhists often speak of the mind as water. When it is stirred, it becomes cloudy. When it is rushed, it overflows. But when it is still, it reflects everything clearly. In the still mind, we begin to see ourselves not as fractured or unfinished, but as whole, just as we are. Not as a problem to be solved, but as awareness itself, resting in its natural state. This stillness is not a blankness. It is deeply alive. It notices everything, but holds on to nothing. It's the quiet joy of a leaf drifting in a pond, the quiet strength of the moon resting above a sleeping world. In this place, we are no longer striving to be better, nor reaching for what's next. We are not chasing wisdom, we are embodying it. We are not learning to be peaceful, we are remembering that peace is what we are made of. To reach this state, the mind does not need to be perfect. It needs to be allowed to slow, allowed to release, allowed to stop fighting itself. You may have glimpsed moments of this, those times when time fell away, when you felt fully present without effort, when you simply were. Perhaps it was while walking in nature, or holding a loved one, or sitting quietly as light filtered through the window. In those moments, there was no need to achieve, no need to prove, just presence. The teachings of the Buddha guide us toward this way of being, not as something reserved for rare moments, but as a path we can walk every day. Through mindfulness, compassion, forgiveness, and the training of perception, we begin to live less from reaction and more from reflection, less from fear, more from clarity. The still mind is not indifferent. It feels deeply, but it does not become entangled. It experiences pain, but does not cling to it. It enjoys beauty, but does not chase it. It welcomes joy without fearing its end. It meets loss without collapsing into despair. This is the wisdom of equanimity, of upka, a mind that is spacious, steady, and free. And this is what you've been cultivating, gently, over these last hours, with each breath, with each moment of attention, with each turning inward. The stillness may have come in waves, sometimes near, sometimes far, but the path has brought you closer to its shore. Perhaps now, as your breath becomes softer and your body more still, you can begin to sense this quiet mind within you. It may not be loud, it may not arrive with fireworks or profound insight, but if you pay attention, you may feel it, like the calm of water after the wind has passed, like the hush that follows a long, deep sigh. You have done enough. You have thought enough. You have carried enough. There is nothing more to fix tonight, nothing more to change or solve. The journey has brought you to this moment, and this moment is whole, So rest now, not as a reward for productivity, but as a return to truth. Let your mind be like still water. Let thoughts rise and fall, like gentle ripples that no longer disturb the depths. Let your breath carry you, as a boat carries a weary traveler, across the surface of the vast, quiet lake that is your own awareness. If you could see yourself from this still place, you would notice how deeply worthy you've always been. Not for what you've done or what you've achieved, but simply for existing, for breathing, for being aware. The same stillness that holds the mountains, the rivers, and the stars holds you too. Let this stillness soothe the parts of you that feel frayed. Let it gather the pieces of the day and lay them gently aside. Let it remind you that healing doesn't always look like doing. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like simply saying to yourself, "This moment is enough." And as the night deepens and your body begins to release the final threads of tension, know this: you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not late to your life. Everything you've experienced, every challenge, every joy, every quiet moment of practice has brought you to this still water. And here, you are home. Let the breath guide you even further inward now, as if each inhale drifts across the surface of a lake and each exhale sinks gently beneath it. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to chase, just you and the quiet and the vastness of your own being, whole, radiant, still. So sleep now, dear one. Let the teachings cradle you. Let the silence nourish you. Let the river of practice carry you deep into peace. And tomorrow when you wake, carry just a little of this stillness with you, a reminder that within you always there is a mind like still water. Good night.